ZOMGitsCriss. She's a popular vlogger here on YouTube, and I received a message asking me if I would do a video refutation of her videos on race. She advances the view that race is but a social erection. She is a social erectionist, and like a lot of other people on YouTube, she has this weird fetish for social erections only as applied to race. And it's interesting that all their views, all their rhetoric seems to coalesce as if it's all coming from the same source, as if it's all the same thing, as if it's all socially constructed. Now that's an interesting alternative explanation for their views. Maybe it's not that race was socially constructed tens of thousands of years ago when humans branched off into different populations and adapted to their respective geographic environments by developing traits that were unique to those populations. Maybe that was all real, and these people's ideas about race being socially constructed, maybe it's their ideas that are a social construct. That would seem to make a lot more logical sense to me. But anyway, to answer the question I received about whether I would do a response to ZOMGitsCriss, well, I sort of am, but I would recommend actually that you view a response that was made by a user named HeyRuka. She went through and I think quite convincingly showed that race is indeed a biological concept and not a sociological concept. Now, HeyRuka has certainly had her share of critics and her share of doubters. I was among those doubters, but with her latest video, she has proven her critics wrong and shown to her doubters that she is indeed committed to getting the truth out about race. She put together a very well thought out and well researched presentation, and I recommend viewing that. What do you suppose the odds are that all these people who say race is a social construct came to that viewpoint independently through a careful analysis of the evidence? What do you suppose the odds are that they came to that view because it was socially reinforced on them, that it was socially constructed for them? Those who insist on defining race in sociological terms rather than biological terms are blatantly attempting to obliterate the distinction between two valid concepts that preceded their social constructivist theories. And those two valid concepts were race as the biological underlying nature of different human populations, and the other concept having a more social connotation referring to people's culture, language, customs, etc. The term we used for that to describe populations was ethnicity. So a couple who is born in China, speaks Chinese, and wears clothes and eats food and has habits that are distinctly Chinese in terms of their cultural roots can be said to be ethnically Chinese. Those two people come to America, have a child, that child grows up, doesn't speak a word of Chinese, doesn't have an accent, isn't tied to the culture of China, absorbs more the culture of America. Well, that person racially still Chinese, but ethnically he is not Chinese. Or you could say racially he is East Asian or Oriental or some other term you want to use to avoid confusing the two concepts. But regardless of the terminology used, the distinction is quite clear that you can use Chinese in two very different senses. And the social erectionists want to make that distinction impossible. They want to merge race and ethnicity as if they were inseparable. So ZOMGitsCriss sports a shirt proclaiming, "We are all Africans." Well, there are a couple problems with that. For one thing, if a white person in the United States were to proclaim himself to be an African on a U.S. Census form, on an application to a college, on an application for a government grant in the minority business program, such a person would face potentially very serious repercussions, which could include jail time. Yes, there have actually been cases where people have tried to put themselves out as black-owned businesses when there were really whites behind the scenes controlling those businesses in order to get special treatment from governments, and the people responsible for falsely claiming to be African American have been put in prison. Yeah, we are all Africans. That would not fly in the United States, and it wouldn't fly in a lot of other countries either. Okay, well, in terms of evolutionary biology, the first humans originated from Africa, and we're all humans, so doesn't that make us all Africans? Well, not really. It would be more accurate, ZOMGitsCriss, for your shirt to state, "I evolved from Africans." See, Africans evolved from a common ancestor, the same one from which the chimpanzees evolved. That's why we share 98% of our DNA with chimps. So, chimps obviously evolved from some other lower ape species, and they in turn evolved from a lower species, and so on and so on. Our common ape ancestor evolved from a more primitive species, which in turn evolved from a more primitive species, and on and on. And Europeans evolved from Africans. Now, if you look at the skulls of Africans and compare skulls of Africans to Europeans, you will notice that there are differences, and this is not something that only racists believe. This is something that all forensic anthropologists know to be true. So you, as a European, ZOMGitsCriss, did indeed evolve from Africans. And that's the most likely scenario anyway. There are alternative theories about the origins of the first humans, but I see no reason to entertain them when it makes so much sense from an evolutionary perspective that we did indeed originate from Africans. If Europeans and Africans had been separated for a long enough period of time without intermixing, then Europeans eventually would have evolved into a separate species. They would not have been capable of producing fertile offspring with Africans. You would have been able to identify Africans as a transitional form from the apes to the Europeans. And you can see clear evidence of this process having been underway by comparing the skulls of Europeans with those of Africans. Now, obviously, the process did not go along far enough to create speciation, but you can see that it was along that path. So look, if you want to get real, then wear a shirt that says, "Some of us evolved from Africans." And I don't know if you want to be thought of as some sort of humanitarian, but you will never deserve such a distinction as long as you continue to dehumanize people and to dehumanize populations of people on this planet by referring to them as social constructs, by referring to them as mere arbitrary abstractions. That leads you to say things like this.
I, personally, don't give a shit about ethnic diversity or lack thereof. If at some point in the future everybody on this planet will be brown, I couldn't care less.
Well, Nordic blondes aren't a separate species, but they could still go extinct. Australian Aborigines aren't a separate species, but they could still go extinct. What ZOMGitsCriss is saying is that she doesn't care if any races of humanity cease to exist as long as one survives. she would be perfectly fine with leaving the world to Australian Aborigines. Now, even if the only differences between Australian Aborigines and the other races of humanity were superficial, those superficial differences, including skin color, hair color, facial features, etc., would be worth preserving, just as a simple matter of aesthetics, just for having some regard for nature, of which we are all a part, just for having some desire as a human to preserve humanity, a desire that ZOMGitsCriss apparently lacks. No, ZOMGitsCriss, we are not all Africans. We all are humans, but some of us have ideas that are monstrous. So that was the result of a viewer's request. You are certainly free to make your own requests, although it is not realistic to suppose that your request will translate into actual videos being made. That's because I am very busy with other things besides making videos. I don't do this for the money. And because I have other videos planned. I would like to dedicate a future video to responding to questions. So I invite you to ask me questions and post them in the comments section of this video, and I will at a future date select a number of questions to answer in a future video.